Cutting through the clutter. This is the Misty Winston Show on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Misty Winston Show here on TNT Radio. I appreciate you tuning in today. Joining us for our third and final hour of today's show is Liam McCollum. Liam is a student at the University of Montana. He's studying philosophy and journalism. He's a Libertarian Party Mises Caucus organizer in Montana, a Hazlitt Fellow with the Foundation for Economic Education, and the host of his own show called The Liam McCollum Show, which you can find on Odyssey, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. So, hey, Liam, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. It's good to talk to you. I was on your show a while ago, but it's been a while, so it's good to speak to you again. Okay, so do you want to just start, I guess, for our audience who is perhaps not familiar with you, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in the Libertarian Party?
Yeah, of course. I'm just a kid from Montana who started a podcast about 2 years ago, as many libertarians did. It's kind of become somewhat of a meme about all the libertarian podcasts out there. But I will say I was kind of ahead of the curve there. I kind of had been thinking about doing it for a few years, and I finally decided to jump in. And I first started out interviewing people who I guess you could say were acceptable to the regime. So I was like interviewing people like Greg Miller. He won a Pulitzer Prize. He works for the New York Times. He was reporting on the Snowden case and everything like that. And then I couldn't help myself. I started to interview more people that I really looked up to with the Mises Institute. And I found people like Reed Coverdale, Dave Smith, Scott Horton, who you have had on the show. And then I just started to lean into my own beliefs. I think I had originally planned on staying pretty neutral, but I couldn't help myself. And that led me to just getting in contact with people like Michael Heiss. He is the organizer of the Mises Caucus at the national level, and I started organizing here in Montana. Montana is already pretty libertarian. We have about 80 people on our list who we try to remain in contact with, but the party has doubled in size here in Montana over the last 2 years, and that's been attributed to the Mises Caucus and their organizing here. So I'm very happy. And I'm excited to see where the party goes. I saw that the GOP just pulled out of the national debates yesterday, and I think that's a huge sign for third parties. I think that's great to totally just drop out of the politically endorsed debate format. I think that's just amazing. So I'm really excited to see what happens in the party.
Yeah, I think that I saw one of your tweets where you were talking about the debates, and I hate the debate format. I think it's terrible. It's basically designed for the quick one-liners, the sound bites. Candidates aren't given an opportunity to really flesh out any of their policies. So it really is just meant for like those quick little quips that you can get. It's like, who can get the best one-liner of the night? You know what I mean? The zinger. And that
Exactly.
really that doesn't help anybody. You know what I mean? That really doesn't help educate anybody on the campaign or the politician or the positions, policies, any of that stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting. I think we need to rethink the debate situation entirely.
And everyone knows that like the most interesting people are like Andrew Yang, Ron Paul, Bernie Sanders, Tulsi Gabbard. I think that those are the people that stand out, and they're always the ones who only get like 2 minutes to actually say anything. So I think if we kind of looked more towards a longer form conversational type platform, I think that would be great. Like if we had a longer form podcast or something like that, where they actually had to sit down and be confronted about their ideas rather than just have these one-liners, like you said, I think that people are really ready for something like that.
Let's let Joe Rogan host it.
Right.
I mean, honestly, I know
too.
he gets a lot of crap, but honestly, he's a great, I don't even really want to call him an interviewer, because he doesn't really interview people. He just has conversations with people. And I think that that's what makes him so effective, is that he makes people comfortable. So he's able to get from people more than perhaps they would, divulge to in another format. You know what I'm saying? Because he's just so good at putting people at ease, and they just open up a little bit more. And I think that's what makes him so effective. So as much crap as he gets, I would be open to him. I mean, I don't know if he's as up on all of the things that he would need to be up on. But I mean, I think he would still be an interesting choice, at least to, I think all candidates should have to be forced to go on like a longer format podcast like that, because you can't hide then. You know what I mean? It's not easy to hide behind platitudes and talking points when you're sitting down with somebody for like 2 hours. That's a lot more difficult. So
yeah, exactly. And there was the scandal with like Hillary Clinton getting all of the questions beforehand and everything. And I think people can kind of see through like it feels very corporate. Like it feels like there's just, I don't know. It like anything on cable news just feels fake. And I think that's why Joe Rogan is getting so many listeners. I mean, 11 million listeners per episode. Like there's a reason for that.
Yeah, that's intense. I mean, honestly, it's well deserved. Again, like I said, he is. I don't always watch his show. I'm not like a huge Joe Rogan fan, but if he has somebody on that I'm interested in or that I think is a good whatever, I'll tune in. And every time I think he does a great job. He asks interesting questions, and the thing I think I like about him most is that he's. I think he knows that he doesn't know it all, and he always asks. Like he's okay to ask questions and be curious, and I like that very much about him. So. Yeah, I think it would be, you're right. Corporate media is so fake and it's so manufactured. And I think people are hungry for authenticity at this point. You know what I mean? Like it all feels very phony. Like all of politics feels very phony at this point. So I think people are kind of hungry for something that's more substantive, which, I think would be an excellent choice. If we really want to have an educated voting population, then we need to, and if we really want to hold politicians to account, which we should, then we should, confront them on their policies and make them explain themselves, and I don't think that should be too much to ask. So yeah, I think that would be super interesting. And I know you used to be a Trump supporter and then you kind of made the transition to being a libertarian. Talk about that a little bit. Cause I love the like hearing people's journeys, like their transition, how they end up where they're at, all of that stuff. So talk a little bit about how you found yourself, moving into libertarianism from being a Trump supporter.
Yeah. So I grew up in a very conservative household, Christian household, and I'm still very Christian. And I'd say that I have a lot of traditional values, but, I think that I was propagandized like most people into the two-party system. I thought that Trump really stood out just because, and I think everyone who was against the empire can kind of recognize that there really is a reason that they went against him. And there was something appealing about that at the time. And just so you know, I was like 16 when he was elected. I was like a junior in high school. I think I must have been a junior in high school. So I was very young, didn't really know much about politics. It was kind of just fun for me. And to see like the corporate press go out against him, it really felt like I was winning, if that makes sense. It's like it was the end of history when Trump won. It felt like, we had finally won. We had beat the other side. It was like a game. And then I had kind of latched on to his non-interventionist messaging. He ran on being somewhat of a, America first foreign policy where we're just going to focus on the economy here. And because of that, when he ordered the airstrikes on Syria, I think it was 59 missiles from the Mediterranean Sea in retaliation for one of their gas attacks. It kind of woke me up a little bit, but there was a part of me who was like really into the military still, like guns and bombs going off. Like I still got really excited about that just from being propagandized. And then a week later, it was April 13th, 2017. The Moab was dropped on Afghanistan, and it wasn't necessarily the bomb and seeing the video that woke me up to it. It was everything that came after that really exposed me to how corrupt the military industrial complex was. So for instance, Donald Trump, it's reported that he didn't even know about the bomb until after it was dropped. I think that was a senior administration official who said that. And it was pretty clear that like Trump had a somewhat liberal policy when it came to foreign policy. He let his administration kind of do whatever they want. And it was reported that a lot of generals were very happy with Trump's foreign policy. And there's this quote where someone says that Mr. Mattis was essentially like saying that you don't even have to ask to drop the MOAB. We didn't even have to get permission. And I'm going to just read this quote here. It says, technically, there's no piece of paper that says you have to ask the president to drop a MOAB. But last year, this time, the way things were meant is I'm going to drop a MOAB. I better let the White House know. And I was going through a civics course at that time with a very libertarian teacher. And I'm very lucky because not a lot of people even go through a civics course in high school anymore, but I had a very libertarian, non-interventionist teacher who taught me about the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, and Congress's powers to declare war, the War Powers Resolution, the AUMFs. And once I found out that a president that, I had identified with and had supported and would have voted for if I could have, kind of had this administration and this foreign policy that wasn't checked. I think that kind of woke me up. And then there was kind of this question of what the bomb even accomplished. And it's not clear that it accomplished much. And the Pentagon didn't even really seem to have any goal with it other than to send a strong message, because at this time, if I remember correctly, there was a lot of concern about North Korea, and they had launched a few missiles into the sea, I think, if I have the timeline correct. And it was seen as kind of just Donald Trump being a strong president. And I remember Reed Coverdale actually points this out a lot. He says that after the Syrian airstrike that I had mentioned earlier, a lot of the media started fawning over Trump, and they said that he had finally become presidential. And to me, it's like a lot of people get excited when there's bipartisanship and when media and the Democrats and Republicans agree. But I think that's actually when it's the worst. I believed in checks and balances, and I don't like when a lot happens quickly. I'm very cautious of that. And we saw a lot of what happens when the government tries to do things quickly with the pandemic and before we have any evidence and stuff like that. And I was very cautious of this, and it really woke me up. And like I said, the idea that Donald Trump was supposed to be a non-interventionist, we all know, like, I think Obama ran on pulling out of Iraq. Even Bush ran on being a non-interventionist. And then, of course, 9/11 happened. But yeah, I mean, there was the former Afghan president, Hamid Karzai. He had said that this wasn't the war on terror. This was an inhuman and most brutal use of our country as a testing ground for weapons. And
yes.
And I think that's pretty accurate. And Hamid Karzai had been an ally of the U.S. and he was now saying that. So there was a whole bunch that kind of led up to this. I realized that, and it is kind of funny because a lot of it wasn't technical. I wasn't very into foreign policy or anything. What really woke me up to Republicans and the empire was more theoretical. I had, my level of politics at this time, like political understanding, was that Republicans were in favor of small government and just these platitudes that you had heard. And I realized that with their foreign policy, they really did not care about small government. And then after that, once I started to look into the foreign policy, I realized that they didn't even accomplish small government at home. And they were in favor of expanding it here, the police state. And I mean, we know about, Donald Trump oversaw the lockdowns and the omnibus bills and the spending that went to all of the companies and, only sending out $1,000 checks to civilians. And so, yeah, since then it's been just this, there was a pretty slow journey to libertarianism, but I found people like Ron Paul, and I've kind of been immersed in this community now, with Reed Coverdale and Scott, and having you on the show. I know you're a leftist, but I'm trying to interview people who are more like-minded and really get involved and try to make some changes at the local level too, here in the party. We're having Scott Horton here next week to give a talk on Tuesday. So I'm trying to like make these connections and try to affect change locally too.
Yeah, no, and I think I appreciate you having me on your show. I mean, I often get lumped in as a leftist. I hate labels, frankly. It drives me nuts a little bit because I feel like it's always just labels are always just kind of used to like just divide people. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
oh, here's your team, here's your box, this is where you fit. But I don't. I mean, yes, I have some leftist ideals. But I don't really. I mean, I don't really like to label myself as that. But it is. I like to talk to people, all kinds of people. Like I am a big advocate for speaking to people that you don't agree with on everything, because I feel like we do have a lot of commonalities. And so even if we have disagreements and we have things that we don't, necessarily, 100% are cohesive on, I think it's still having those conversations, I think, and reaching out across political ideologies is always going to be helpful, because frankly, when it comes down to it, those disagreements don't even matter until we deal with the system. And that's really where we all have to kind of come together.
I was looking at some photos the other day of Occupy Wall Street, and you'll see people holding up signs that are, they're pretty left leaning. You can tell, but then in the crowd, you'll see a few "End the Fed" signs. Yeah. And I think that is really telling. It used to be the conversation about we are the 99%. And there was the Tea Party movement. There was the Occupy movement that kind of came up around the same time. And now there's almost no talk of that, the kind of bottom up movements that are possible and that we've seen in the past. There really isn't that much talk of it because we're so immersed in identity politics and just trying to divide people. And I think this is actually, I think Dave Smith makes this argument that it actually seems to be somewhat of a corporate strategy to divide.
Yes.
And I think that's very, very true.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think it's entirely intentional, because they know that if we all come together, then they're in real trouble. And so there's a very concentrated effort to keep us arguing amongst ourselves so that we don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain. And so you're right. There are a lot of things that we all agree on. And it's unfortunate that, and it's because it is a very intentional thing that those conversations aren't being had anymore. We have been systematically beat down. And every time a movement like Occupy crops up, they destroy it. And, Barack Obama allows cops to brutalize those protesters. And then it diminishes the movement. And it really does just kind of, I think the American populace has allowed itself to get beaten down so hard that people are just, they don't even know how to begin. They don't even know how to start to fight back. They don't even know where to go. And then you add on that everybody, has to work 2 or 3 jobs and they're tired and they got to take their kid to soccer practice and mow their grass and all that stuff. It's really hard for people to even educate themselves about what's actually happening. And then we have a mainstream media that is lying to everybody on a regular basis and is completely, owned and operated by corporations and is nothing but state-run propaganda. And it's really a recipe for disaster. And I don't know how we get those movements revitalized. I mean, we've been trying to revitalize the anti-war movement, and it's really pulling teeth to even get people out in the streets, to get people to get involved, to get active. It's really unfortunate. I don't know how we get back to having those strong on the ground movements, those strong grassroots movements again, that go across political ideologies, because again, these are things that we can all agree on. I mean, most people agree on ending wars. That should be kind of a no-brainer. I don't think anybody really likes war. And so, if we can revitalize the anti-war movement, I think that would be a good start, especially now, given that, we're the Russia-Ukraine and, we've got airships or get airship carriers off the coast of Korea, and we're trying to start stuff with China, and there's all kinds of stuff going on all over the place. We need an anti-war movement now more than ever, really. And
Yeah.
it's, you were talking earlier about how the Moab and all of that stuff. And I feel like in this country, I talked about this, Kyle Anselo, and you may be familiar with him. He writes for antiwar.com and the Libertarian Institute.
Yeah, he's great.
I was talking to him. Yeah, I love him. He's actually going to be a regular guest on the show. He's going to be on every Monday at 3.
That's
I
awesome.
swear he writes like 104 articles a week. He's like
Sure
constantly writing something. He's like, I don't know how he does it. But we were talking about it. And I think culturally in this country, we see military force as strength. And that's not how we should see things. We should really we should be seeing somebody who seeks diplomacy and seeks peace as strength. And I mean, you can see it when, a presidential approval rating is down. That if you start a war, your approval rating goes up. And that's really kind of sick. It's kind of twisted,
Yeah, and I know Scott, and I think Kyle has talked about this before too. Scott Horton and Kyle Anzalone have talked about the fact that diplomacy hasn't been the number one strategy here. I know that most people say, well, Putin doesn't want to meet and Lavrov doesn't want to meet. And even if that were the case, like Blinken and Biden should be out there, like in the media saying that they need to meet with them. Like that should be the biggest talking point, that Lavrov isn't sitting down with us. If it really is the case that they're the ones who don't want to be diplomatic, like that should be the biggest narrative, that they're unwilling to sit down and negotiate. But that's not the narrative right now. We're continuing to send weapons over there. And actually, I think it was yesterday, antiwar.com reported that Russia's now officially warning the U.S. to stop arming Ukraine. And this is the first time that they've called out the U.S. and said that our shipments are actually targets. And this is very concerning because they also reported that Biden or Kamala might be heading to Ukraine soon. They're saying that a senior official is most likely to be attending Ukraine and Kiev. And Russia said that they would strike Kiev if they continue to send weapons through there. So that just sounds like a disaster. And it almost like everything that the United States seems to be doing like is almost for the intended purpose of escalation. And it's very concerning.
Yes. I mean, come on. This has been this whole conflict has been a product of our creation. I mean, we have every step of the way, we have instigated and escalated this. There have been multiple, instances where we have had opportunity to establish diplomacy and, make moves that would calm things down. And instead, every step that we take is in an effort. It almost seems as if it's in an effort to escalate. You're right. There's been lots of things that we could have done over the course of, not even just the past couple of months, but over the past 8 years, things that we could have done or not done that would have aided in calming the situation down rather than, getting us to the point where we're at now. But again, I think that that's the point. I think that in the United States, it's, we see military force as a sign of strength. And so that's, kind of our go-to. It's, we want to be seen as like the big bad, and really we're just the bully of the world. And you're right. It's like a constant kind of just constant escalation. It doesn't matter what the situation is. We're seeing it in Ukraine. We're seeing it with China. We're seeing it with Korea. We see it with Syria. It's like everywhere we go, we're constantly trying to make things worse than they need to be. It's just, it is just the way, again, culturally that we are in this country. And I don't know how we combat against that, because it's kind of forced upon us from birth. Like we see in the military as like this glorified institution, and, military force is good. I mean, we have Brian Williams on national television getting excited about the beauty of bombs being launched. And that's just gross. I mean, when those bombs land, people die. And that's something that we celebrate on national TV and mainstream media. And it's really sick culturally that we see it that way. We should always be working towards diplomacy in these situations as much as humanly possible. And it's never the case. And I don't know. It's a really sick and twisted way that we do things here and have always really. But we need to take just a quick break, just a couple minutes, and we'll be right back with more from Liam here on TNT Radio.
The common housefly, caught in the clutches of the spider's web. Every move it makes just makes matters worse. Then, dinner time.
Feast on the captivating stories, videos, and helpful information on our website.
Whoa.
Dinner's ready.
Oh, man.
Escape is futile.
Just one more video.
Get stuck in our web.
TNTRadio.live.
Mama, what does the chicken say? Dog. Cat. Giraffe.
Giraffe, really? Giraffe.
You're not going to get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff, like making sure your kids are buckled correctly in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right.
Visit NHTSA.gov/
the right seat.
Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
I'm Smokey Bear, and I made an assistant to help you prevent wildfires.
Dude, I've got this. I've been camping since I was 5 years old.
But I am a camping influencer.
You know what? I'll bet you $5. Assistant Smokey, what is the best way to put out a campfire?
To put out a campfire, drown with water, stir, drown again. Then make sure the fire is out cold by feeling with the back of your hand.
Wait, really?
I'll take the $5.
Learn more at SmokeyBear.com.
Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
Today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
Okay, we are back, everybody, here on TNT Radio. I'm Misty Winston. I am joined this hour by Liam McCollum, who is a huge part of the Libertarian movement. Really quickly, before we jump into it again, I do just want to remind everybody that April 20th is the next important court date in the Julian Assange case. And my dear friend Emmy in London is organizing a protest outside of Westminster Magistrates Court, which is at 181 Marylebone Road in London. That is the court is essentially going to sign the extradition, and it will go off to Priti Patel for approval. So if you are in the London area and you can make it out to that protest, please do. Again, that's April 20th. And I think it's going to be from 9 a.m. until 10:30. So we need people in the streets out there making noise. So please do that if you are in London or anywhere near London and can make it out. Okay, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about you mentioned earlier that the Libertarian Party is growing in Montana. I think I've been kind of eyeballing the Liberty movement. I'm friends with Reed Coverdale. I'm friends with Magnus, and I've had Scott Horton on my show. And so I've been kind of, friends with Kyle Anzalone. He's been on my show multiple times. And so I've been kind of monitoring it, I guess, sort of from the outside. But it seems like it's been growing fairly significantly over the past, I don't know, maybe 6 years or so. I think Gary Johnson had a big part in that. I think he was really one of the first Libertarian candidates that I was like, oh, okay. Other than Ron Paul. What is what's the party up to these days? I know that Dave Smith has become quite a popular figure in the movement. Is he going to likely be the presidential candidate, do you think, in 2024 for the Libertarian Party?
Well, first about your point on Johnson, I think really what happened there is actually just that the other candidates were so terrible that people were forced to kind of look at the Libertarian Party, because as a libertarian and a small L libertarian, as it has been called, I'm very philosophically libertarian, but I kind of refused to join the party before kind of the last 2 years and before Dave Smith really started to get involved in the party. And part of that is because the philosophy and the messaging from the party wasn't very strong. And what I've kind of been saying, because a lot of people take that to be a very negative thing. And we kind of like resent the Libertarian Party because of that and everyone who came before. But I think that they've really kind of built something. And the fact that people who, weren't as strong on messaging like Johnson and Jorgensen got any press at all says so much. Jorgensen, for instance, like she toured the country, she came to Montana, but she didn't really have any big press thing. Like she didn't have any big interviews that would have given her press. She was endorsed by Joe Rogan, like after the fact. He later said that he voted for Jorgensen, but like he never announced it before to like really pump up the numbers for her. But the fact that I run into people just, you know, in Missoula where I live who say, yeah, I voted for Jorgensen, and they just bring that up without me saying that I am a libertarian or anything. I think that says a lot, and it really shows us what kind of moment this is, that if we are able to get someone like Dave Smith or a big name libertarian out there who has connections, who can go on Joe Rogan or who can go on Fox News, I think that we can really make some waves. I don't think that we could necessarily win, but I think that we won't get the 4% that we usually do. I mean, the Libertarian Party has been kind of, their goal has been to stick with 4% every presidential election and to get ballot access. And I think a better strategy is messaging. And I know that that's what Dave Smith has been saying. He doesn't necessarily think that we can win. I don't want to speak for him, but he has seemed to say that like his goal, if he were to run for president, would be to wake people up. And I also think that a priority of his would be to reshape the libertarian message so that it is associated with being anti-war, because the fact that it isn't is a shame. Bill Weld ran as the vice president candidate, and he ended up endorsing Hillary Clinton afterwards. And I just think that that's absolutely terrible. I mean, if you know anything about the libertarian tradition, Murray Rothbard, Mises, Ron Paul, just all of those names, it's really, I think, unfortunate that has been associated with really bad messaging in the past. Like you'll hear people say, if I mention that I'm a libertarian, they think of like people taking off their shirt on the debate stage or something like that. Like that's a common thing, or Gary Johnson's Aleppo moment where he says, "What's Aleppo?" It's like, if we had a Dave Smith run, I think that the entire image of the party would change. I think that they would still say that we're terrible. I think that we would probably get called all the worst things that they call anyone they don't like. But I think that it would radically change the entire image of the party. I mean, Dave Smith knows where Aleppo is. He also is on the other side of the phone with Scott Horton all the time. So I think that, you know, he hasn't announced, and I know he's said that he's still thinking about it, but I think he's going to, and I'd be really excited, and I would support him if he did.
I think he should. I think you're right. I think it would be at least it would energize the party, the movement. I mean, I'm not a libertarian, so I don't mean to speak for libertarians, but he is I've been paying attention to him. He's a very charismatic speaker. He's very intelligent. He knows what he's talking about. He's very good at kind of invigorating people and getting his message across. So I think that it would be really beneficial to the party if he did it. So Dave Smith, if you're listening, you should do it. I think Scott Horton will probably talk him into it. I think Scott's pretty persuasive, so I think that he'll be able to talk him into it. But I think you're right. You're not going to win. Listen, I'm pretty anti-electoral politics myself. I feel like you're never going to get the kind of change that we need from electoral politics because the system is broken. So you're not going to win because they're going to make sure of that. We don't have fair elections. You know what I'm saying? Like we're not. You can't even get a fair election. So even if you were to get great numbers, or even if you were to even potentially be able to win, they would make sure that you didn't. But I think it would be good for the movement. I think that it would definitely be good for getting the message out, for bringing new people into the party. So I mean, I definitely think it would be a worthwhile venture. And that's coming from somebody who's I don't do electoral politics at all. But I do think that especially with somebody like Dave Smith, because I have been watching him for a while, and he is a really good speaker. I mean, he's really good at pulling people in, and that's the big thing, is getting your message across. I mean, you just spoke about Jo Jorgensen. No offense to Jo Jorgensen. I don't know her. Maybe she's a lovely person, but she's so boring and like she didn't get any press. Like, nobody knew who she was. I would talk to people and they had no idea who the Libertarian candidate even was in 2020. You know what I mean? They had no idea who was even running. So that's not good.
Yeah, and I got in the party to support Jacob Hornberger, who was running under the Mises Caucus, and because I had joined the party, I figured that I would support Jorgensen anyway. I actually interviewed her on my show earlier on, and I really advocated for her, and I think that it really is that it was just boring, and I don't think that it's any fault of her own. I think that she has a lot of, and I hate to assume this, but I just think that she has a lot of people and people managing her campaign who do like the social media and everything like that. And I think everything bad about that campaign was probably attributed to social media mistakes and management mistakes. But I think that the messaging wasn't strong either. And I think that it would be absolutely different if Dave Smith were to run.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, also, you're right, because Dave Smith has, he kind of has that star quality thing, but he also has connections. He's been on Joe Rogan before. He can use that kind of thing to, garner support and to be able to talk to people. Because like you said, Joe Rogan gets 11 million listeners every episode. That's intense. That's a lot of people that you can reach, and that I know that he's already been able to reach. I know that he's already been able to have those conversations with Joe Rogan. And I mean, I can tell you that I've had leftists who have come up to me and talked about how, oh my gosh, did you see that guy Dave Smith on Joe Rogan? He talked about this and he talked about that, and they were all excited about it. And so I think that he has the potential to be able to bring people in from across the ideology, you know what I mean, from across the spectrum, because he is speaking to things that I think a lot of people agree on. So I mean,
and for people who haven't listened to it yet, they should go back and listen to his most recent appearance on Joe Rogan's show, because I think that this one got around 11 million views. I don't know how to find the stats for that, but there's a clip that went trending on YouTube for a bit where he was talking about the war in Yemen and the genocide in Yemen. And thank God, but there's a ceasefire right now, which is the greatest news in a really long time. But he kind of, I think he really woke a lot of people up to that. I mean, I didn't even know about the war in Yemen until I discovered Scott Horton a couple of years ago. So I think that it's very important that we have voices out there like that. And Scott actually made this point at, I think it was the Texas Libertarian Convention a couple of weeks ago. He said that's probably the most viral clip, viral content about the war on Yemen that has ever existed. Because I mean, when has anyone ever had a platform with 11 million viewers and they're talking about Yemen on there?
Yeah. No, I think that was the clip that kind of went viral, period. I think that was the clip that a lot of leftists, because Yemen does not get any coverage. The mainstream media does not talk about Yemen at all. None. Zero. So the idea that there's this guy on Joe Rogan getting 11 million listeners, and he's talking about Yemen was like, I mean, astounding. Like, nobody could believe that this was happening. And he did such a great job, and he was able to very succinctly, put together what is actually happening in Yemen. And he was able to describe it in a way that I think most people could understand, because Yemen, I mean, it is like, this is an ongoing crisis, but it doesn't get any coverage. And so the idea that he was able to talk about it to such a massive audience was huge. It's we do. I mean, even despite the fact that I'm not a libertarian, I will support that every day of the week. I don't care who you are. If you go on somewhere and you get in a conversation started about Yemen, then I support that every time. And he was able to do it so brilliantly that, you know, it's I'm hopeful that if he runs, that will be something that he'll be able to talk about even more. Because I think that he'll be able to talk about a lot of issues too that don't get any airtime or any coverage. And, you know, because he does have kind of a bigger name and a platform, I think he'll be able to get a lot more attention on some of those things.
Yeah, and to kind of speak to Libertarian Party strategy, you had said that you also agree that we wouldn't be able to win and everything. I think kind of what the idea is to market libertarianism and market this anti-war sentiment to people at the local level and see if they can make any changes locally. So, for instance, the Libertarian Party is pursuing the Defend the Guard legislation in the state here. And we have a few legislators who are very interested in it. It's just a question of the constitutionality of it and getting support from people. And that's kind of the question right now. But what this legislation would do is essentially tell the national government and the president that the state of Montana will not support and will not send our National Guard unless Congress declares war. So it would essentially just be taking back the National Guard and the authority and giving it to the governor until they fulfill the Constitution. So that's just an example of something we might do with a national campaign. So if Dave were to run or someone else were to run, the goal wouldn't necessarily be to win. It would be to direct people at the local level and try to make changes like that, because libertarians are in favor of localism and decentralizing power. And I think the last couple of years have really shown people that needs to be done with like what states like Florida and states like Montana have done to kind of reject this COVID policy at the national level. I mean, Montana looks nothing like New York, and it hasn't looked anything like New York for like a year or longer than a year. Like we locked down for a week. And I remember there was a moment where I was like, can I really like not go to the store? And then we leave and then everyone's out, like Walmart's full of people. And it's like, yeah, no, Montanans aren't listening to this. And I think that it's really good that we don't have one point of failure. If there was one policy that was just, a blanket policy across all 50 states, it would absolutely be a disaster. And the fact that states have the power really to ignore that, I think is really good in the long term for the empire and the country. Really, I think the states will be able to live longer than the empire will be if this policy is pursued. And I think you had mentioned before the break that you don't know how we will come to terms with just being so divided and all of this. I think that the economic situation and the fact that we have overextended ourselves will really make us have to. I mean, we just hit record inflation numbers. I think it was 8.5% year over year in the CPI, and the CPI is a manipulated number. Like if you look at rent and the percent that rent has increased, it's much higher. The way that they weigh certain goods in the CPI is kind of very arbitrary, and it doesn't really make sense why they do it. Like they don't even calculate rent. They have like this thing called homeowner equivalent rent, and I somewhat understand what that means, but it's all to say that it's not an actual representation. And if you look at like the real percent change in like beef, if you look at the real percent change in real estate and everything like this, I think that what we're seeing is really the effects of the last few decades of foreign policy. And we can't afford overextending ourselves in these foreign countries with the tax base that we have. Like at this point, I don't even know why we're paying taxes, because the Federal Reserve just prints up all of this money through QE and hands it out to all of these companies in the stock market. And I mean, they're essentially, like they've admitted that they're essentially handing money to people in the stock market, and BlackRock, they signed a contract with BlackRock so that BlackRock could do it too. And that controversy is interesting, as BlackRock, I think, is one of the shareholders of Twitter. So there's kind of this,
of course,
it has this conflict with Elon right now. But yeah, I think we will be forced to come to terms with it. I think that eventually we will be seeing protests in the streets again. I think that there will have to be Occupy movements. I know there's a local company that just is trying to unionize because there's fear over wages. And I mean, like, real wages have decreased significantly compared to the increase of prices. I don't have the figures right now, but everyone knows it. And I think the Federal Reserve just announced like a couple days ago that corporate profits are up 25%, but like prices are rising for the consumers. Like, I think everyone can kind of recognize what happened in 2020 and the massive distribution of wealth. And I think that eventually we will have to wake up to it. And I don't want there to be massive. I kind of hope for unrest, but I really don't want like violence or anything like that. But I fear that because of how irresponsible our federal government has been in overextending themselves. And I mean, we have a massive military budget, and I think we will have to come to terms with it. Like Scott I'm sure he's talked about this with you, that the policy in Afghanistan was Osama bin Laden attempting to replicate our policy against the Soviet Union. When we tried to get them in a quagmire in Afghanistan, Osama bin Laden learned from that, and we bankrupted the Soviet Union, and Reagan claimed that he had bankrupted the Soviet Union. Every conservative knows this, that, he told Gorbachev to tear down the wall. Well, the pretext of that is the quagmire and the war in Afghanistan between the Soviets and the Mujahideen that we had supported and backed from 1979 and Carter. And essentially we fell into the same trap, and we've done it in more than just one country. It started out with me learning about Afghanistan through the Moab that we talked about earlier. But I learned shortly after about the conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq, and then in Syria and in Yemen and Somalia. And it's like, no one really is aware that we are doing these things. I think the average person, like you said, they're paying attention to, they just have work, they have a family to take care of. And I don't think they have the time, but I think when they'll be aware of what's going on is when they'll really feel it, when they're at the grocery store, when they're filling up. Biden announced that, because of the sanction policy, we might have food shortages, which is questionable, because then it makes you wonder if these sanctions are even worth it, if the Americans are going to starve here. Right. I tend to think that it's more than just the sanctions that are going to cause the food shortages. I think it's Federal Reserve policy. But yeah, I to answer that question that you had mentioned before the break, I really do think that we will have to come to terms with it economically.
Yes, and I think that you're absolutely right. And what's unfortunate is most people are incapable of caring about something unless it directly impacts them. And that's, I mean, no fault. It's just human nature. I think it's really difficult for people to, be able to empathize with something that isn't impacting them. And people are very busy, and it is really hard to find information right now. It always has been, but in particular right now, with all the algorithms and all of the censorship and all of that stuff, it's really difficult to genuinely educate yourself about what's really happening in this country and around the world. If you just look at Ukraine, for example, if you even mention anything about Ukraine that isn't pro-Ukraine and absolutely anti-Putin, you could potentially lose your platform. You will be, you could get demonetized, you could get deboosted, you could be shadow banned, all of those things. And that's the case. That's just for that. I mean, that really happens all the time. And so actually educating yourself about what's happening and what we need to do in order to combat the things that are going to be going down. It's really hard, and people just don't have the time. They do not have the time. But I do think you're right. There's going to be a straw that breaks the camel's back, and it's going to come to a point where I hope that you're right. I think that a violent unrest would be unbelievably bad. But I think that I don't know how we avoid it. And I think that the empire is preparing for that. I mean, they're taking COVID money and giving it to cops, and they're giving cops even more weapons of the military. I think that they're doing that for a reason. I think they're preparing for the potential of violent unrest. And they want to make sure that they're protected. So, I mean, it could really go bad for us, but I think that, at some point, there is going to be something that this all breaks down, because we can't continue this way. Like you just said, we're going to give Joe Biden $813 billion for the military. $813 billion. What are we giving him $813 billion for? It's absurd. That's obscene. It makes no sense. And it's, it's just it's mind blowing to me that this is something that, people are just seemingly okay with. And there's really been no protests about this. In fact, we have protests out there in favor of no-fly zones. I'm amazed. I can't believe that's a thing that's happening, but there we are. It's crazy, but there we are. I
was out tabling. I was out tabling with a student group that I have on the campus here, and we were asking people whether or not they supported war against Russia or whether or not they supported sanctions against Russia. I guess the positive thing is that a lot of people don't really know what sanctions are. I guess that's maybe a negative because that's the intended effect. Like it's kind of like a euphemism to obscure really what it is. But so the majority, of course, are against war because they don't want to be shipped over to Ukraine, but then they'd say that they're in favor of economic penalties or something like that. But every once in a while you would get one person who says that we need to assassinate Putin or that we need to get directly involved in Ukraine. We didn't ask a question about a no-fly zone because I don't think people understand what that means. Like it would literally draw the United States into a direct conflict with Russia. The fact that people didn't really understand what sanctions were was enough to for me to be like, well, we probably shouldn't ask that question because people, I don't think that they can see through those euphemisms. But to talk about, you had said you feared violent kind of revolution and unrest. I think that that's kind of why the Libertarian Party is trying to take this moment and gear things more locally. I think a more peaceful revolution would be decentralized change. And I think it's Jeff Deist who has called it like soft secession. You've seen people move from New York to Montana. You've seen people move from New York to Florida. And I think that the constitutional way that allows you to kind of get around this is to ignore federal policies, like when the CDC policy of the OSHA mandate came through. Montana just ignored it, and they actually made vaccine discrimination illegal. And I think if we could do something like that would allow a state to take back its authority when it comes to the military, like the Defend the Guard legislation, or the radical in me would love to see, being that Montana is the treasure state and our motto is the Oro y Plata. I think that the most radical policy, I think, would be to repeal legal tender laws here and allow people to trade in cryptocurrencies or whatever tender they want and really secede from the fiat system we have. And really, I think what that will allow is people to jump ship early and kind of hedge themselves against what is coming and the collapse of the empire and the collapse of the dollar. The ruble has rebounded. It's gained all of its losses. I think it's at a historical high, and everyone thought that our sanctions would absolutely destroy them, but they've now tied their ruble to gold, it seems. And I think that we really have shot ourselves in the foot. And I think that Americans really need to become economically aware so that they can safeguard themselves.
Yes, I 100% agree with that for sure. Okay, so we only have a couple minutes left. I want to make sure you have time to tell everybody where they can find you so they can follow you in your work. So let everybody know where they can keep track of you.
Yeah, so you can find my YouTube channel at Liam McCollum. You can also find the Liam McCollum Show on Spotify, Apple Music, and SoundCloud. I'm also on Odyssey, and everyone should check out Odyssey because they're a great decentralized platform. And I've been supporting them for a while now. You can also follow me on Twitter at Liam McCollum. And yeah, that's about it. If you're interested in joining the Mises Caucus or the Libertarian Party, please look them up in your browser and sign up. It's pretty easy to sign up at the Mises Caucus. There's just a sign up sheet as soon as you enter their website, and do the same for the Libertarian Party. I think that it would be really great if you guys got involved.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on the show. I always appreciate these conversations. It's always really enlightening. And so I would love to have you back on so that we can continue this conversation. We have to have, I think that coming together, like this across ideological differences, I think is always a good thing. So look, we were able to have a grown-up conversation, even though we disagree on things, Liam. It can happen. Okay. So thanks everybody for tuning in today. I really appreciate it. I'll be back on Monday at 3 p.m., but hang tight for more here on TNT Radio.